So I'm a little late to the party on this one, but I was expecting it to blow over quickly. Well, I misjudged that one for sure, and at least part of this vid will dive into why. Of course, I'm talking about the PTU wave restructure that we've just heard about, but this particular short will be more focused on both the community as well as in how CIG has been communicating with this community or not for the last couple years. That sounds interesting? Stick around. Let's get this. I generally try to stay away from drama posts, which honestly has probably hurt this channel's growth, but since I'm doing this more as a hobby than anything else, I'm actually okay with that. One of the reasons I don't really dive into these things is because they tend to go in predictable cycles, and they usually blow over in a week or so, with the usual suspects hyping it up for clicks and their own agendas. But in this case, I'm going to make an exception because it touches on a theme that I've mentioned several times recently, CIG's communication with the community. Let's start with where the drama started, and it's all on this post right here. If you landed here, you've probably already seen this, but just in case, the meat of the post is down here in how the PTU waves are going to be structured moving forward. So full disclosure, I'm both Evocati, a subscriber, and a Praetorian for that matter, so even if I weren't Evo, this probably wouldn't impact me very much. Added to that, there was apparently another dev post or comment elsewhere that I wasn't able to find, where the dev mentioned that the plan was to roll out the P2 waves much faster than they have in the past. That's all fine. I think that was largely how they rolled out 3.19. It's been a long time in Evocati, and then it blasted through the PTU in waves pretty quickly. So yeah, on that face, it's fine. But as with a lot of CIG's fumbles recently, it comes down to optics and communication. Evo, totally. I've talked loosely about Evocati in the past, but I'm limited to what I can say because of the NDA that's attached to that. Suffice it to say that Evo takes that testing role pretty seriously, except for those that violate the NDA and leak all the time. And the chat and the forums for Evocati are mostly filled with talks about bugs we're seeing, and how to repro them, what's causing them, what settings, if any, might be causing it, and so on. Of all the waves, Evo is probably the one that comes closest to what CIG originally envisioned for the public test universe, the PTU. It is literally a testing environment to try to find the most offensive and game-wrecking bugs before the patch goes out to a wider audience. A lot of people on the outside of that group seem to think that Evo just gets access to all the toys right off the bat, but I'll put it this way. Think about the things that break the game in the live environment right now. If you've ever jumped into the PTU, particularly an earlier build, you know how broken they can be. The Evocati builds are that, but several orders of magnitude more broken. Features aren't in, even features that have long been a part of the live verse. The builds can be highly focused, and CIG will have specific things they want tested. So yeah, Evocati is the real thing. You can think of Evocati as the pre-alpha build of the patch cycle. Coming up at alpha is the first wave. At this point, CIG thinks they have a relatively stable build, and while it won't necessarily have all the features or loops or ships of the coming patch, it'll at least have some of them, and most of them in a mostly playable state. The goal of this first wave is, well, okay, it was to get a bigger group of testers in the pool, like actual testers. Evocati is basically unpaid QA. And Wave 1 is kind of an expansion of that. Historically, Wave 1 was still considered to be true testers, just maybe not quite as dedicated as the members of Evocati. And they weren't under NDA, which was the other advantage. There was always a nod to subscribers in the earliest non-NDA branch, but it's this third one down here that's really getting people riled up right now. Legatus, Navium, and I have no idea if I said that right, concierge level backers. So for those who don't know, those are the people that have dropped 25,000 backing this game. And that's a pretty exclusive group. A lot of the breathless posts and vids that I've seen zero in on this, often with clickbait titles like 25k to play the PTU, when that's not actually what's happening. Well, okay, it's not all that's happening. Again, the wave is the most active players over the last 2 patches, which makes sense. And subs, which is neither here nor there, but I'm fine with CIG throwing some bone to the subs. So if you sub or you play a lot, you get to test. Most subs tend to be more dedicated to the project anyways, just from my view and anecdotal evidence here. And I wouldn't be shocked if there was a strong correlation between, let's say, subs in the list of the most active players. So yeah, that's fine too. But Legatus Navium, granted, these are the whales of the whales. I've been putting money into this project for a decade now and treating it like my hobby. But I still haven't hit that level and probably won't for several more years, if ever. The problem with this, like so many CIG flubs, is optics. It makes this project look like it's pay to play to a ridiculous degree. And CIG should have been well aware at this point how both the detractors and the community itself would take that. Now, if they had shown that the LegNav players were also far and away the most active players, totally cool. But if that was the case, why not just leave it at most active? Again, those earlier PTU builds tend to be a little more broken, and you want people in there like Evocati that take the testing aspects seriously. If I were doing this, I would have kept it at most active players, along with players that submit or contribute to the most tickets. Although that would probably need a little verification so you aren't just getting people spamming tickets to get early access. The whole point of doing waves in the first place was to roll it out to more experienced testers first, hammer out the most egregious bugs, and then refine it through the waves till you basically have something that's ready to drop to live. I can get on board with the subs getting a crack too, especially with the cutbacks in the shows that we've seen over the last couple years, which is what the subscriber system was originally supposed to fund, but maybe not in that first wave. It's just an unforced error, and it's one that CIG keeps making. I'm not sure if this is marketing, which has seemed to take the brunt of criticism lately, and not completely without merit, or just someone making a decision in a silo, which sounds good at first, but well, these flames can be seen from space, I'll put it that way. These are the kinds of things that CIG does that, more than the development of the game itself, seem to upset the community the most. I think most people, or at least most people who want to see this project succeed, get that the slow pace of development is producing some cool results over time. But it's these communications and changes that seem to come out of nowhere that seem to, for lack of a better word, disrespect the community that do the most damage. These are the kinds of things that become harder and harder to defend, and it's so unnecessary that that's the frustrating part. I'm not sure if CIG needs a sanity check between these changes and the release of the communication to the community, but something has to change with these weird choices that seem to come out of the blue. There's been choices in the last couple of years that have seemed a bit more predatory. While this has certainly been overblown by the detractors in the past, lately some of these choices have been giving these complaints some teeth. And of course this was compounded by CIG dropping this bomb at the point in the release cycle where it would be most likely to cause issues with the community. And by this point, CIG should really know better. And all of this has been further compounded by the 2 additional things adding to the pile. First, between 2.6 and 3.0, there was a content drought that lasted almost an entire year. Since then, CIG's been pretty good about getting a patch out to us about every quarter. Sometimes this would stretch into 4 months if the patch had content that was particularly tricky, but by and large that's held true. Until last year. Granted, persistent AA streaming, PES, was a huge deal for this project, and it broke a lot of things in this game. But in the face of the game breaking, CIG continued to add more fuel to the fire by having repeated free flies, which only seemed to both add to the instabilities of the game, as well as charge up the anti-Star Citizen crowd, and add to their numbers when their experience sucked. All the beautiful screenshots and vids in the world won't bring back those players who have a terrible experience in the game they've only been hearing negative things about for years. While what we have now is far more stable than what we had even a couple months ago, the damage is done on that front, at least for the near future. Finally, on top of this, CIG has gradually been getting more and more tight-lipped. For those of us here in the early days, everything used to be out in the open. That was both good and bad. It was good because the community actually felt like part of the project, and it was bad because, well, the community felt like it was part of the project. Not only were a lot of misconceptions built up around a few toss-away lines here and there, but armchair devs began to predictably crawl out of the woodwork, forgetting that at the end of the day, while we were the backers, it was Chris Roberts' vision that we were paying for. So it makes sense that, as the project matured, they'd tighten up their communication. But these days, it seems like everything is being saved for SitCon. And then SitCon rolls around and the information is actually pretty sparse. We get in-depth information about a handful of features, but the grand design, the big plan, how things will work, and what we should expect of the project at large, largely still remain a mystery. And rather than dumping our own hopes and dreams into that, recently it seems like the community is gradually leaning away from this approach. Everything being saved for SitCon or Squadron 42 makes the community feel more and more disconnected. Even while we get monthly reports, so much of that tends to work on unannounced feature or vehicle continues rather than this is how exploration will work. So what would normally be a naturally sour part of the dev cycle has been further exacerbated by a further sense of ennui and saltiness, most of which is starting to feel pretty deserved where before it felt more entitled. And as someone who really wants to see this thing succeed, that's frustrating. And that's all I have for now. Let me know what you think, and if you haven't already, like and subscribe for more of this. Catch me next time.